I don't know if this was ever reported correctly because when I tried to look it up later, I couldn't find anything that matched what happened to us. January tends to do that. Things disappear quietly after the snow melts. This happened during the first week of January, a few days after New Year's, when most people had already gone back to work and campus was still half empty. I was living off campus in a small Midwestern college town, in a duplex that backed up to a frozen drainage field and a line of dead trees. It was cheap, drafty, and quiet in the way places get when everyone leaves at once. There were 3 of us in the house, me, my roommate Aaron, and his cousin Luke, who was crashing on the couch just for the break. Luke had been there since mid-December and showed no signs of leaving. The first thing I noticed was the footsteps. They weren't inside the house. They were outside, circling it. At first, I blamed raccoons or deer. The ground was hard with frost, and any movement sounded heavier than it should have. But the steps had a rhythm to them, slow, deliberate, and always stopping right under my bedroom window. My room was on the first floor. The window faced the back of the house, toward the field. No lights back there. No foot traffic. No reason for anyone to be standing that close. The first night, I heard it around 1:40 a.m. I checked my phone because it felt important to remember the time. The steps stopped, then started again, pacing left to right. I didn't look out the window. I don't know why. I just lay there, holding my breath, waiting for it to stop. It did. After maybe 2 minutes. The next night, it happened again. Same time window. Same pacing. On the third night, it knocked. Not hard. Not loud. Just a soft, deliberate knock on the glass. What? Then nothing. I sat up so fast I felt dizzy. I listened for laughter, running, anything that would suggest a prank. There was nothing. Just the hum of the heater and the distant sound of a train horn somewhere outside town. I didn't tell Aaron or Luke yet. Felt stupid. Like something I'd imagined because January messes with your head. But on the 5th night, Luke brought it up first. "Do you hear someone walking around outside at night?" he asked casually while making coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. I froze. "Yeah," I said. "You too." Luke nodded. "Every night. Always back there." Aaron laughed it off. Said it was probably a guy cutting through the field or animals. He said he'd grown up around farms and this was normal winter noise. But Aaron slept upstairs facing the street. That same night the steps came back. This time they didn't stop under my window. They kept going. Around the house. Slow. Steady. Then the back door handle rattled. Just once. I texted Aaron immediately. He came downstairs half awake, checked the locks, looked out the kitchen window. He didn't see anything. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints. The next morning there were footprints. They didn't lead up to the house. They started there. Just one set, facing outward, as if someone had been standing still for a long time before deciding to leave. The snow around them was compressed deeper than it should have been, like the person had been there longer than the prints suggested. Luke took a photo. Aaron shrugged and said it was probably old tracks re-exposed by the wind. The footsteps stopped for 2 nights after that. Then on January 9th, my window was open. I never opened it. Not in January. The latch was loose and the curtain was pushed slightly inward, like someone had tested the space and decided it wasn't big enough. That night, Luke slept in Aaron's room. I didn't ask why. He didn't explain. At around 3:10 a.m. I heard breathing. Not inside the room. Outside the window. Close enough that I could hear the unevenness of it, the way the inhale paused before the exhale. Like someone trying not to be heard. I don't remember getting out of bed. I just remember being in the hallway, pounding on Aaron's door, whispering his name so loudly my throat hurt. By the time we got back to my room, the breathing was gone. The next day we called the landlord. He sent maintenance. They tightened the latch and told us the insulation probably shifted in the cold. That night there was a note taped to the back door. It wasn't threatening. That's what made it worse. Just said, "You left your window unlocked." No name. No handwriting we recognized. Printed letters, unevenly cut, like they'd been traced. We called the police. An officer came out, took photos, wrote things down. He asked if we had any disputes, any exes, anyone who might be messing with us. He suggested it was a prank. After he left, Luke packed his stuff. He didn't say goodbye. He just left. The footsteps continued for another week. Sometimes earlier. Sometimes later. Always outside. Always slow. On January 17th, they stopped completely. No explanation. No closure. We finished the lease in silence. Aaron moved out in May. I stayed until summer, but I never slept in that room again. I slept on the couch with the lights on, facing the back door. Years later, I searched local police logs. Nothing matched. No reports. No incidents. But when I drove past that field last winter, I noticed something I hadn't before. The trees behind the house had a narrow, flattened path running between them, straight toward where my window used to be, like someone had been walking it for a very long time. Has anyone ever explained why January feels louder at night? I was working security at a regional hospital in Northern California in January of 2016. Graveyard shift. Midnight to 8. The kind of job where nothing happens for hours, and then something small happens that never quite leaves you. The hospital had 3 buildings. The main tower, the air wing, and the old annex. The annex wasn't abandoned exactly. It held records, outdated equipment, and a handful of offices no one used anymore. Technically, it was still active, which meant it stayed unlocked from the inside. The heating barely worked and the lights buzzed constantly. No patients were supposed to be in there. Ever. On January 12th, I got a call from the front desk. They said someone had triggered a motion sensor in the annex stairwell. This wasn't unheard of. Sensors glitched. Pipes shifted. Animals sometimes got in through the loading dock. Still, protocol was protocol. I grabbed my radio and walked over. The stairwell lights were on when I entered. That was the first thing that felt wrong. They were motion activated and they usually took a second to kick in. They were already on. The stairwell smelled like dust and cold concrete. I stood there for a moment, listening. No footsteps. No voices. Just the hum of the building. I cleared it and reset the sensor. 30 minutes later, it tripped again. Same stairwell. This time I checked the floors above and below it. Nothing. No doors open. No signs of forced entry. At 1:47 a.m., it tripped a third time. Now I was irritated. I went back with another guard, Miguel. We joked about ghosts, the usual graveyard shift humor. We split up to cover more ground. I took the lower level. Miguel went up. That's when I heard someone running. Heavy footsteps on concrete, moving fast, downward, toward me. I pressed myself against the wall and raised my flashlight. Nothing came around the corner. The sound stopped abruptly, like it had hit a wall. Miguel radioed in from above. He asked if I was messing with him. I said no. He said he'd heard someone sprint past him on the stairs heading down. We met in the middle landing. Neither of us was laughing anymore. We finished the shift without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the annex had been occupied. The next night, the cameras caught it. At 2:11 a.m., one of the hallway cameras flickered. Just a second. When it came back, there was someone standing at the far end of the hall. They weren't moving. They were facing the camera. The footage was grainy, black and white, but you could tell it was a person. Hospital gown. Bare feet. Hair hanging forward, obscuring the face. Miguel and I watched the clip in silence. "Patient?" he finally asked. "No," I said. "No patients in the annex." By the time we got there, the hallway was empty. No doors open. No sound. But the temperature in that section had dropped. Our breath fogged as we walked. Facility said the HVAC must have failed again. The third night was worse. The front desk got a call from inside the annex. From an internal line. The caller didn't speak. They just breathed. Slow. Wet. Like someone struggling through congestion or fluid. The call lasted 12 seconds before disconnecting. I checked the call log. It originated from a phone that had been disconnected years earlier. We searched the annex again. Every room. Every stairwell. Nothing. At 3:02 a.m., the motion sensor tripped one last time. This time it wasn't the stairwell. It was the security office. Our office. Miguel looked at me. "That's not possible." We were sitting right there. The door behind us was locked. The camera feed showed no one entering. The sensor reset itself 30 seconds later. Neither of us spoke. The hospital administration reviewed the footage. They said the figure was likely a former patient who wandered in from the street. They said the call could have been a system error. They said sensors malfunction, but they quietly decommissioned the annex 2 weeks later, boarded it up, shut off utilities. No more patrols. I transferred to day shift in February. Miguel quit altogether. Last year, out of curiosity, I requested the old incident logs through a public records request. There were multiple entries in January, different years, same annex. Motion sensors. Unexplained calls. A barefoot individual seen on camera. None of the reports had resolutions. All of them ended the same way. Area cleared. No persons located. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own house. Not in the sense of break-ins or obvious threats. No, this was something slower, subtler. Something that creeps in when the wind outside is biting and January nights are long and endless. It started on January 8, 2017, when I moved into a small Victorian townhouse in a quiet neighborhood just outside Providence, Rhode Island. The rent was cheap, especially for January, and the landlord promised it was fully winterized. The house was old, built around the 1890s, creaking and settling in ways I thought were charming. Original wood floors, tall ceilings, and enormous windows that looked out over the frozen backyard. I had the place to myself. The first night, everything seemed fine. I unpacked, set up my laptop, made tea, and curled up on the couch under a blanket. But sometime around 1 a.m. I thought I heard a whisper. Not a real voice, just a sound that mimicked one. It was soft, distant, almost like the wind moving through the cracks of the window frames. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. By January 10th, things started happening regularly. The whispers became footsteps. Slow, deliberate pacing across the second floor. I live alone, so there shouldn't have been anyone there. I checked every closet, every room, and still, nothing. But the footsteps continued. Every night, around the same time, sometimes lasting just a few minutes, sometimes stretching close to half an hour. I told myself it was stress. Moving, work, the long winter nights. Maybe I was imagining it. But then objects started moving. The first time it happened, it was something small. My keys were on the kitchen counter. I came back from grabbing water, and they were on the table by the living room couch. No one had been there. No doors were open. I was alone. The next night, the refrigerator door was open. Not just ajar, wide open like someone had been rifling through it. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I'd forgotten to close it properly. But by January 12th, it was happening more frequently. The keys, the fridge, a lamp turned sideways in the living room, the bathroom faucet dripping despite being off. The cold started to get worse too. I have central heat, but the upstairs bedrooms were freezing. Windows I was sure were closed had condensation on the inside, as if someone had been breathing near them. I would wake up shivering with the blankets pulled down toward the foot of the bed. I started keeping a notebook. I recorded every unusual sound, every moved object, every strange sensation. By January 15th, the entries were filling up quickly. 12:47 a.m. Footsteps upstairs, pacing back and forth. Checked rooms, empty. 1:03 a.m. Whispering in living room, barely audible. Go, or don't, couldn't make out clearly. 1:15 a.m. Lamp knocked over in living room. That night, I stayed on the couch, laptop on my chest, recording audio. I heard it again, the pacing, the whispering, now clearly coming from the hallway outside the bedroom. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the landlord. Yes, the house is old, he said dismissively. It creaks, it settles, nothing to worry about. Maybe pipes or drafts. But he had never lived there himself. I realized then that no explanation he could offer would satisfy what I was feeling. On January 16th, things escalated. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I felt it, like a breath on my neck. I turned around. Empty room. The window behind me rattled, but no wind. My mug slipped from my hand. The water spilled across the counter, but there was no puddle on the floor. The sound of dripping came from upstairs. I grabbed my phone, considered calling 911, but I was ashamed to. Who would believe this? A man alone in a Victorian house saying someone, or something, was stalking him upstairs? The next night I couldn't sleep at all. I stayed on the couch, recording, watching the staircase. Around 2:30 a.m. I saw movement. A shadow. Tall, humanoid, just beyond the archway at the top of the stairs. I froze. It didn't move toward me. It didn't move at all. just stood there perfectly still watching. I blinked. It was gone. I checked every room again. Doors locked. Windows closed. Not a trace. But I could feel it, like the air was heavier in the living room. Colder. I called a friend, someone I trusted completely. I told him everything. He laughed at first, nervously. Probably stress, he said. But he agreed to come over the next night. January 18th, around 1:45 a.m., we were sitting in the living room with the lights on. I had every lamp in the house lit. The floors creaked again. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Then a knock, not loud but deep, deliberate, on my bedroom door. My friend froze. I froze. The knock came again. We stared at each other. I whispered, "I didn't touch it." It stopped. Silence. Then the whispering started. Not through the speakers, not from the laptop, but from the top of the staircase. My friend heard it too. "Leave. Go. You shouldn't." We couldn't see it. Couldn't find it. Couldn't explain it. We left the house. That night, I stayed at his apartment. I didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally returned, the house felt normal. Warm. Empty. Silent. The landlord checked the house with me. Nothing unusual. He said it was probably drafts. My friend told me to leave it, to move, to sell the lease. I stayed. But every January since then, I swear I can hear the footsteps again when I think about that house. And I think about the shadow standing silently at the top of the stairs, waiting, just watching. Have you ever stayed somewhere that felt like it remembered people better than it remembered time? This happened in January of 2012, during a stretch of my life I don't like revisiting. I was between jobs, recently separated, and crashing wherever I could while trying to get back on my feet. For 2 weeks, that place was a roadside motel just outside Amarillo, Texas. One of those long, low buildings shaped like a horseshoe, with doors that opened straight to the parking lot and thin curtains that never quite close all the way. It was cheap. Cash only. No questions asked. That should have been my first warning. I checked in on January 4th. The woman behind the counter didn't ask for ID. She slid the key across the desk without looking at me and told me not to bother housekeeping unless I stayed more than a week. My room was at the far end of the building. Room 17. The heater worked intermittently, kicking on with a violent clank before settling into a low hiss. The walls were thin enough that I could hear televisions through them, game shows, laughter tracks, voices fading in and out like they were underwater. The first night passed without incident. The second night I woke up to knocking. Not on the door. On the wall behind the bed. 3 soft taps. Then a pause. Then 3 more. I checked the time. 2:18 a.m. I pressed my ear to the wall. Silence. I assumed it was someone in the next room, maybe leaning against the wall or dropping something. Motels attract all kinds of noise. I went back to sleep. The next night, the knocking came again. Same pattern. Same time. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I knocked back once, hard, just to signal someone was there. Nothing answered. On the 4th night, I heard crying. It was faint, like it was coming from far away, but it echoed strangely, as if traveling through the walls themselves. A woman's voice. Not sobbing. More like exhausted weeping, the kind that comes after something bad has already happened. I stepped outside in my socks, scanning the parking lot. Every room was dark. No doors open. No movement. I went back inside, locked the door, and pushed the chair under the handle. January 9th was when I noticed the smell. Cold cigarettes and something metallic like old blood or rust. It came and went without warning, strongest near the bathroom. I checked the sink, the tub, the toilet. Nothing. The smell would vanish as quickly as it appeared. That night, I dreamed I was lying in my bed, unable to move, while someone stood just out of sight near the bathroom door. I could hear breathing. Slow. Controlled. When I woke up, my body was still locked in place. Sleep paralysis, I told myself. But when I finally managed to sit up, I noticed something on the mirror. A handprint. Small. Pale. Pressed flat against the glass from the outside of the bathroom mirror. I wiped it away with my sleeve, my heart hammering. The next morning, I asked the clerk if anyone had complained about noise. She stared at me for a long moment. "People don't usually stay in that room long," she said finally. That was it. No explanation. On January 11th, the knocking stopped. Instead, the phone rang. The room phone. The one bolted to the nightstand, its cord yellowed with age. It rang at 2:18 a.m. I let it ring 3 times before answering. There was no voice, just breathing. I slammed the receiver down and unplugged it. The next morning, the phone was plugged back in. I know it was. I hadn't touched it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with the lights on, watching the wall behind me. At exactly 2:18 a.m., the crying started again. Louder this time. Closer. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room. Then the bathroom door creaked open. I hadn't closed it. The mirror fogged from the center outward, like someone had breathed against it. Words appeared slowly, traced through the condensation. He won't stop. I left. I didn't pack properly. I didn't return the key. I just got in my car and drove until the sky started to lighten. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for the motel online. Room 17 didn't exist anymore. The room numbers jumped from 16 to 18. I dug deeper. Old news archives. Police reports. In January of 1998, a woman had disappeared from that motel. Last seen entering room 17 with her boyfriend. He claimed she left during the night. No body was ever found. The case went cold. I still wake up sometimes at 2:18 a.m., convinced I hear knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Have you ever driven a road so empty it feels like the world forgot it was there? In January of 2006, I was working long-haul security transport, overnight vehicle recovery for insurance companies across the Midwest. It wasn't glamorous. You picked up wrecked cars, abandoned vehicles, sometimes cars recovered after crimes, and moved them to storage yards. Most of the work happened at night to avoid traffic and attention. On January 22nd, I was sent to retrieve a sedan abandoned along a rural stretch of Route 218 in northern Iowa. The report said the car had been sitting there for 3 days. No plates. No signs of vandalism. Just parked neatly on the shoulder, doors closed, hazards off. Local deputies had already checked it once. No warrants. No missing persons attached to the VIN. Just a car that didn't belong to anyone anymore. I reached the location just after 1:30 a.m. The road was dead silent. No houses. No lights. Just flat land stretching into darkness, broken only by frozen fields and a distant tree line. The temperature sat well below freezing, and the wind cut through my jacket like it knew exactly where to find skin. The sedan looked wrong immediately. There was no frost on it. Every other surface around it, grass, road signs, even my own windshield, was coated in ice. But the car sat there clean like it had just been parked minutes ago. I approached slowly, flashlight sweeping across the interior. The keys were still in the ignition. The radio was on, volume turned all the way down, stuck between stations. That low static hiss filled the cabin, barely audible but constant. The driver's seat was pushed far back, like whoever sat there had been tall. The passenger seat was empty. No footprints in the snow around the car. None. I called dispatch and logged the condition. They told me to hook it and bring it in. As I winched the car onto my flatbed, I noticed the trunk release lever inside the driver's door was snapped clean off. Not broken. Removed. The drive back took nearly 2 hours. Somewhere along the route, my radio began cutting in and out. Not the truck radio but the car's radio behind me. Static rose and fell, sometimes forming shapes that almost sounded like voices. Almost. At 2:47 a.m., my headlights caught something standing in the road ahead. I slammed the brakes. The figure didn't move. It stood in the center of the lane, tall and thin, facing away from me. No coat. No hat. Just dark clothing that blended into the night. I flashed my brights. The road was empty. I told myself it was exhaustion. 10 minutes later, the radio behind me surged in volume. I pulled over, heart racing, and climbed onto the flatbed to shut it off manually. That's when I saw the back seat. It was wet. Dark stains soaked into the fabric, spreading outward from the center like something had pooled there for a long time. The smell hit me next, iron and decay sharp enough to make my eyes water. The trunk began to knock. Not violently. Just once. Then again. Slow. Deliberate. I froze, my breath fogging in the air. I radioed dispatch again. No response. Just static. The knocking continued. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, coming from inside the trunk. I didn't open it. I climbed back into my truck and drove. By the time I reached the storage yard, the sun was beginning to rise. I parked the car, signed the paperwork, and left without another look. Later that afternoon, a detective called me. They'd opened the trunk. Inside was a body, male mid-30s. Severe hypothermia. Cause of death estimated 3 days earlier. He didn't match any missing person reports. The detective asked if I'd noticed anything unusual during transport. I told him about the radio, the knocking, the figure in the road. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I still think about every winter. "That's strange," he said, "because the medical examiner says the trunk latch was sealed shut from the inside. No damage, no struggle marks." I asked him what that meant. He said, "It means he was alive in there for a while." The sedan was auctioned off 6 months later. No buyer kept it longer than a week. Every report mentioned the same thing: the radio turning on by itself, and knocking from the trunk, especially in January. Have you ever stayed somewhere and realized too late that the place remembers everyone who ever slept there? This happened to me in January 2019. I was a grad student at a small university in northern Michigan. To save money, I rented a room in a converted boarding house near campus. 3 stories, brick exterior, narrow staircases, creaky floors, and an old sign that read, "Langley House, rooms available." The landlord was an elderly man named Mr. Holloway. Quiet, stoic. He showed me to the 3rd floor room at the end of the hall. Key in hand, he reminded me of 2 rules. Keep the door closed at night. Never go into room 9. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. Room 9 had been converted into storage, he said, and the previous tenant used it to hoard old papers and books. Nothing strange about that, I thought. The first week was normal. The other tenants were graduate students like me, polite, mostly quiet. The house smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The ceilings were high. Sunlight pooled through the large windows in the morning. Everything felt cozy. But January nights in northern Michigan are long. Darkness arrives early, and the cold cuts through even the thickest coats. That first Saturday night, around 11:30 p.m., I was reading in bed when I heard faint scratching. I paused. My window was closed. The noise didn't come from outside. It came from the hall. I got up. The hallway was empty. I opened the door. Nothing. Only the floorboards creaking under my own weight. I went back to bed, chalking it up to the house settling. Then it started happening every night. Scratching at the walls. Whispering just beyond comprehension. Footsteps pacing the hall outside my door. I asked the other tenants if they heard anything. They shrugged, pretending not to. One of them, a quiet woman named Lydia, glanced at me nervously and said, "Some rooms carry memories." I laughed nervously, assuming she meant the place was just old. On January 14th, I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the front door creak. The house was quiet. Everyone else was studying or asleep. A figure stood in the doorway, Mr. Holloway. "You've been in the hallway," he said flatly. "At night?" I was just getting water," I said. He stared at me for a long moment. "Room 9 remembers." I didn't understand. That night, curiosity overtook caution. I waited until Mr. Holloway left the house early for his morning errands. Then I went to room 9. The door was locked. I tried to pick it. The lock clicked open. Inside, a small room stacked with papers, old journals, boxes of photographs, and what appeared to be hundreds of name tags, each labeled with a date and a tenant's name. Some were recent, some dated back to the 1970s. And in the center of the floor was a single bed. The sheets were folded neatly, but the mattress had indentations, like someone had been sleeping there. I felt the air shift. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged instantly. I swear I heard whispering. Names. Hundreds of names. Whispered all at once. I bolted. When I got back to my room, the air felt thick, oppressive. My door, which I had closed earlier, was now slightly ajar. The next night, I tried to leave the house entirely. Snow had drifted high, covering the sidewalks. I walked quickly to the street. But when I looked back, I swear I saw shadows moving behind the windows of room 9. For weeks, I tried to ignore it. I kept to my room. I studied late into the night. The scratching and whispers never stopped. The floorboards always creaked, pacing above and below, even when I was alone. By the last week of January, I had enough. I confronted Mr. Holloway. "What's in room 9? I demanded. He looked at me with hollow eyes. "It's where they wait. Every tenant leaves a piece of themselves. Some never leave at all." I moved out the next day. I've never returned. Years later, I still have the dreams. A hallway that stretches forever. Whispering names. Shadows moving just out of sight. And every January, without fail, I hear the scratching again, as if the walls themselves remember me. Have you ever stayed somewhere and felt like the walls were watching you? Not metaphorically, literally watching, remembering, marking you. That's what happened to me in January 2017, and I still can't explain it. I had just started a new job at a small-town newspaper in rural Pennsylvania. The town was tiny, barely 1,000 people, surrounded by dense woods. To save money, I rented a room in an old Victorian house just outside the town limits. The place was cheap, and the landlord was a quiet man in his 60s named Mr. Whitman. He showed me to the attic room. Narrow stairs, low ceilings, a single window facing the woods. The room smelled faintly of mildew and old paper, and the carpet was threadbare. "Keep the window shut at night," he said, handing me the key. "And don't go into the lower west wing. It's not safe anymore." I laughed. Sure thing. The first few nights were uneventful. I would work late at the office and come home around 11 p.m., pour a cup of tea, read a little, and go to sleep. But the silence in that house was different. It didn't feel empty, it felt patient, like it was waiting. On January 5th, I woke to a sound at 2:06 a.m., soft scratching coming from the floor below. At first, I assumed it was mice. The attic floorboards creaked under my weight as I got up and checked the hallway. Empty. The lower west wing was dark. The lights were off. I told myself it was nothing. But the next night it was louder. The scratching became a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across wood. And then I heard whispers. Not words I could understand, just low murmurs, almost like someone chanting under their breath. I froze. My body refused to move. When I finally forced myself to the window, the woods outside were black, motionless. Sleep became impossible. Every creak, every groan of the old house felt amplified. Doors that should have stayed shut would slowly creak open. Shadows would move at the edges of my vision. On January 9th, I tried to ignore it. I sat in bed, covering my ears with pillows, pretending I couldn't hear the whispering. That night, the whispers were louder, and a new sound joined them. A low, rhythmic knocking coming from the lower west wing. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I counted. It repeated for nearly 20 minutes. I called Mr. Whitman in the morning, asking about the wing. "Nothing there," he said. "It's just old furniture. Don't worry about it." I didn't believe him. January 12th was the worst. I woke to scratching directly outside my attic door. I swear it sounded like fingernails. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. But the walls were different. Faint scratches etched into the wood paneling, spelling something I couldn't read, half-formed letters that looked like they were written in a rush. I tried to leave. I went to my car, but the driveway was blocked by a snowdrift that hadn't been there before. I called a friend in town, and when he arrived to help, he stepped into the house and immediately turned pale. "You should leave," he said. "I don't think you're alone in here." I laughed nervously, trying to act calm. But I knew he meant it. That night, around 2:06 a.m., I woke to a presence at my window. Not outside, but inside. My window was locked, the glass unbroken. But I could feel someone, or something, pressing its hands against it from the other side. I froze. My breath fogged the glass. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I spent the next few days in near constant fear. Every night, the whispers, the scratching, the tapping. I tried recording it, but when I played it back, the recordings were silent. Just static. January 18th, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a small bag and left, planning to stay in a hotel until I found another place. When I came back with my friend to collect my things, the house was different. The attic was colder, darker. The walls had more scratches, forming words this time. "You belong to us now." I didn't stay to question it. I grabbed my things and left. Mr. Whitman never called to ask why I left. I stopped paying rent. I moved into a new apartment in town, closer to work. But the whispers didn't stop. Every January, without fail, I hear them again, soft at first, growing louder in the dead hours of the night. The rhythm of the tapping. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. And sometimes, in dreams, I see a shadowed figure at my attic window watching, waiting. I've never returned to the house. I've never tried. But every January, I remember the attic, the whispers, and the cold, patient presence that seemed to know my name before I even arrived. Have you ever moved into a place that felt like it had already been waiting for you? Not the kind of place where you imagine ghosts, but the kind where the walls themselves seem to breathe. And remember, this happened to me in January 2020. I had just finished my first semester of graduate school in Maine and was moving into a small studio apartment in a town called Damariscotta. The apartment was advertised as historic, in a converted 1800s carriage house behind an old mansion. Rent was cheap and I was desperate to live alone for the first time. The landlord was a woman in her 70s, Mrs. Callahan. She was polite, soft-spoken, and had lived in the mansion for decades. She handed me the keys and gave me one warning. Stay off the upper loft. And if you hear anything, don't investigate. I laughed. I always laughed at old warnings like that. The studio itself was small. A kitchen, a bathroom, and a single open room with a spiral staircase leading up to the loft. The windows faced a dense thicket of pines. The first night I unpacked, ate dinner, and went to bed. Nothing unusual. Then the scratching began. Around 1:15 a.m., I woke to faint, rhythmic scratching coming from the loft above. I ignored it. The next night it was louder. By the third night, I swore I could hear whispers, low voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. I tried recording the sounds with my phone, but every time I played it back, the files were blank. No whispers, no scratching, just static. On January 7th, I noticed the first physical change. A faint outline on the floorboards beneath the loft staircase, like someone had pressed their hand or knelt there. I chalked it up to my imagination. By January 10th, I couldn't ignore it. I heard footsteps pacing above me. Not just occasional creaks of an old building, but deliberate, slow pacing like someone was circling the loft. I asked Mrs. Callahan about it. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes glassy. You should leave, she said. This house doesn't like visitors. I laughed nervously. I think you're joking. She shook her head. No, it knows you're here. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers began around 12:50 a.m. I could make out shapes in the shadows. Tall, dark shapes leaning over me as I lay in bed. I pulled the blankets over my head and tried to sleep, but the shapes stayed. January 13th, I tried to go into the loft, just to see what was there. The spiral staircase creaked violently as I climbed, and the air grew colder with every step. The loft itself was small, dusty, filled with cobwebs and old furniture covered in sheets. Nothing unusual, or so I thought. Then I saw the mirror. It wasn't a normal mirror. It was tall, ornate, with the kind of patina that suggested it had been in the house for over a century. But the reflection wasn't mine. I froze. The figure in the mirror was a man. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. He stood just behind me, staring directly into the glass. I spun around. The loft was empty. The mirror stared back at me. I ran down the staircase and locked the loft door behind me. The next few days were unbearable. Whispers, scratching, pacing, sometimes all three at once. I tried to ignore it, but it followed me everywhere. The air in the apartment seemed heavy, charged, like static electricity before a storm. I could feel something brushing past me when no one was there. On January 18th, I tried leaving. I went to the town, walked around, tried to distract myself. When I returned, the apartment felt different. The furniture had been slightly moved. My desk chair, my books, even the arrangement of my dishes. I was certain I hadn't touched them. That night, I heard the whispering again. Louder. More urgent. I could make out words now. Leave. Stay. Belong. Stay. I realized the loft door was now open. I hadn't touched it. I climbed the stairs, trembling, flashlight in hand. The mirror was gone. In its place, a shape crouched in the corner, blacker than shadows, leaning forward like it had been waiting. I screamed and ran down. By January 20th, I knew I couldn't stay. I packed my things and planned to leave that night. As I carried boxes down the narrow staircase, I felt the air shift behind me, cold, heavy, watching. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw faint shapes in the loft, tall, gaunt, staring down at me. I moved into a hotel that night. My apartment stayed empty for a week while I worked remotely. When I finally returned with movers to collect my last belongings, the loft staircase had collapsed slightly, and the loft itself was blocked by a beam that hadn't been there before. The mirror was gone, replaced by a single word scratched into the floor. You can't leave. I've never returned to Damariscotta. I've never even tried to find that loft or the house again. But every January, without fail, I wake to whispers. Sometimes a soft scratching on my bedroom floor, sometimes the faint feeling of eyes on me, always in the dark, always around 1 a.m. And every January I remember the loft in that carriage house, the tall gaunt figure, the mirror that wasn't a mirror, and the feeling that some houses wait. And when they wait, they never forget. Have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong even before anything happened? That's how I felt the moment I stepped into my new apartment in Boston, January 2018. I had just graduated college and was starting my first job at a small marketing firm downtown. Money was tight, so I found a studio in an old brick building near the edge of the city's north end. The rent was cheap, and the building had character. High ceilings, exposed brick, and narrow hallways that smelled faintly of dust and damp wood. The building had a reputation among students for being quirky, which I took as a positive. The landlord, a man named Mr. Reynolds, was polite but evasive about the building's history. He handed me the keys and muttered something about making sure you're careful at night. I laughed it off. The first few nights were normal. I unpacked, set up my workspace, and cooked dinner. But the building was quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Not the kind of quiet you can enjoy. It was oppressive. Heavy. On January 5th, I woke around 1:30 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I live alone. My neighbors were on the other end of the building. I checked the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. The next night the sound returned. But this time it wasn't footsteps. It was scratching, faint, like someone scraping a fingernail along the wall. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened my door. The hallway was empty, but I noticed a faint set of marks along the baseboard. Small scratches, deep enough to catch the paint. I texted a friend, joking about haunted apartments. He didn't respond. January 8th, I started noticing other things. Items in my kitchen moved slightly. A coffee mug wasn't where I'd left it. My laptop was open even though I had shut it the night before. I didn't know what to think, but I began to feel watched. Constantly. On January 10th, I woke to a whisper. I'm not exaggerating. A soft, breathy voice right next to my ear saying my name. I bolted upright in bed. No one was there. My door was locked. Windows closed. My heart was pounding. I called Mr. Reynolds the next day. Are there security cameras? I asked. No, he said. I don't need them. You're safe here. The building's old, but nothing ever happens. I wasn't convinced. January 12th, the whispers returned, this time coming from the kitchen. I lived on the second floor, so no one should have been able to get in. I tiptoed to the door, peered into the hall. The apartment was empty. And then I saw it. The back door to the fire escape, normally locked from the inside, was wide open. The winter wind howled in from the alley below. But no footprints in the snow outside. No sign that anyone had entered. I began recording everything on my phone. Whispers, footsteps, strange cold spots in my apartment. But every time I played the recordings back, there was nothing. Only static. By January 15th, I had started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. I could no longer ignore the feeling that something was in my apartment. It didn't move like a human. It lurked, shifted, waited. I felt it in the corner of my vision, always just beyond focus. That night, the whispers were clearer. Words I could understand. You can't stay. You can't leave. I froze. The lights flickered. My phone battery died instantly. The temperature dropped so low I could see my breath. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. And then I saw it. A shadow, tall and humanoid, moving at the far edge of the kitchen. It didn't walk. It glided. Its shape was too dark, too solid to be a shadow cast by light. And yet it wasn't entirely there. It flickered at the edges like static on an old TV. I screamed. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? When I finally had the courage to blink, the shadow was gone. The back door was closed. My apartment was silent. I called a friend immediately and told her everything. She laughed at first, then paused. "You need to get out," she said quietly. "The building isn't normal. There are stories." Stories? I didn't understand. She explained, "Years ago, someone had died in my apartment. A young woman, alone, found dead in the kitchen in winter. The case had been ruled accidental. She had fallen down the narrow staircase from the loft space above. But locals whispered that she hadn't been alone, that the building itself had claimed her." I laughed at her, but deep down I knew she was right. January 18th, I decided to leave. I packed my things in silence, my apartment cold and oppressive. Every creak of the old floorboards felt like it was mocking me. Every whisper, every scratch, every shadow, it followed me as I carried boxes to my car. When I returned the keys, Mr. Reynolds didn't ask why I was leaving. He just took them, nodded, and said, "Some buildings, they choose who they keep. Don't be sad. You weren't meant to stay." I never returned. I moved into a small motel for the next few weeks. The apartment was rented again shortly after I left. But I still hear whispers sometimes. In my dreams. In my apartment now. The same soft, breathy voice, always around 1 a.m., always saying my name. Always reminding me that some places, they don't let you go even after you leave. Have you ever stayed somewhere and felt completely alone, but not in the way you expect? Not lonely but watched. Not uncomfortable but wrong. That's how I felt the moment I moved into an old boarding house in northern Michigan, January 2019. I had just accepted a seasonal job at a small historical museum in Marquette. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough for me to afford my own place, at least for the winter. A friend from work told me about a boarding house on the outskirts of town. It was cheap, the building had character, and the owner, a man named Mr. Holden, seemed friendly enough. The house was 3 stories, built in the late 1800s, with steep wooden stairs, narrow hallways, and high ceilings. There were 6 rooms total, most of them rented to students or seasonal workers like myself. I was assigned a second-floor room at the end of the hall. The window faced a frozen creek. The walls were thin and the floorboards creaked under every step. Mr. Holden gave me one rule. Don't go into the 3rd floor. It's unsafe and I don't want anyone up there. I laughed. Sure thing. The first night was quiet. The building creaked as old houses do, but nothing unusual. I unpacked, cooked a small dinner, and fell asleep to the faint hum of the radiator. The next night, I woke around 1:30 a.m. to a faint tapping. At first, I assumed it was the wind or a branch hitting the window. But the tapping was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, repeating. I got out of bed, traced the sound to the floorboards, and saw nothing unusual. The hall was empty. By January 7th, I had noticed small things. A chair moved slightly from where I'd left it, a mug on the counter facing a different direction, even the blanket on my bed folded differently. I tried not to think about it. Maybe the wind caused it, or maybe I was imagining things. On January 9th, I heard the whispers for the first time. Soft, low voices coming from the hallway outside my room. I opened the door. Empty. Only the faint smell of cold wood and dust. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. Doors would creak open by themselves. The temperature would drop suddenly in one corner of the room, then return to normal. Sometimes I would wake to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of my bed, heavy and still. I never saw anything, but the sensation was undeniable. January 12th, the whispers became intelligible. My name. Over and over. Emily. 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 I froze. My blood ran cold. I had never told anyone my full name except for work, and it wasn't posted anywhere. I called a friend from work, desperate for reassurance. You need to leave, she said, quiet but firm. I don't know why, but something is not right there. That night, around 2:03 a.m., I woke to footsteps outside my door. Slow, heavy pacing. I held my breath, heart hammering. The doorknob rattled. I whispered for it to stop. Nothing. Then the tapping started again, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. January 14th was when I first saw it. I had gone to the kitchen for water. The hallway to the stairs was dimly lit by the single bulb in the ceiling. And there, at the far end of the hall, a shadow moved. Tall, humanoid, slightly distorted, as if it didn't entirely belong in the light. It didn't walk. It glided, keeping its head perfectly still, staring at me. I screamed. The shadow disappeared. My friend later told me that my screams woke half the building. I apologized to everyone the next day, embarrassed, but no one had seen anything. By January 16th, the activity was relentless. Whispers, tapping, cold spots, items moving, shadow figures. Sometimes I would hear someone breathing behind me, close enough that I could feel their presence, only to turn and find the hall empty. I tried to leave that night, packed my things quietly, slipped out the door, but when I returned to collect the rest of my belongings a few hours later, something had changed. The second floor hallway looked different. The floorboards warped slightly, the peeling wallpaper seemed to stretch, and carved into the wood just outside my room were faint letters. "You can't leave." I froze. Every rational thought fled. I ran to Mr. Holden, demanding answers. He looked at me with wide, haunted eyes. "You shouldn't have gone to the third floor," he said. "The third floor?" I yelled. "I haven't been up there." He shook his head. "It's not about being up there. It's about being noticed." I didn't understand. The next day, I tried to sleep during the day, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. But the tapping and whispers returned, louder than ever. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus at work. I began to feel nauseous whenever I entered the building. On January 19th, I finally worked up the courage to ask a neighbor, a man in his 40s who had lived in the building for years. He looked pale when I explained what was happening. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "The house, it likes people. It likes them alive. But once it decides, it follows." That night, I packed everything and drove to a motel in town. I didn't look back. But even now, when I close my eyes, I see the shadow. I hear the tapping. I hear my name whispered in the dark. I've never gone back to that boarding house. I don't even know if anyone lives there now. But every January, I remember that cold hallway, the whispers, the feeling of eyes on me, and the warning carved in the wood. You can't leave. Some buildings, they don't just have history. They have memory. And when they remember, they never forget.